Today's guest is a world-renowned AI researcher and generative AI pioneer. In her book, she explores the rise of creative AI from its earliest pioneers to the cutting-edge tools shaping music, art, and human imagination today. She reveals the true capabilities and limitations of Gen AI, drawing on psychology, philosophy, and her own cutting-edge research. She reveals how generative AI exposes both the brilliance and the blind spots of human society. It is a pleasure to welcome the author of Creative Machines, Maya Ackerman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on the show, and it's our first show on video, Maya, as well. So you're our first guest that first time they've seen me as well.
Oh, wow. That's so special. I love it.
Great to have you with us. And I thought we'd share four things today, and we'll go much deeper than this. But the unknown history of AI generated creativity. So we're all using it, and it's almost like it was sprung upon us and people started using it, but they don't really know where it came from. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the capabilities and limitations of creative AI, your own framework for using AI as a tool to enhance our creativity as humans, and then the really important aspect that's often overlooked, which is the ethics of AI. So I thought we'd start with what you mean by creative machines, where they came from, going right back to Harold Cohen and the machine painter Aaron.
I love that we're starting there because that's where I started. It was 2015 and I was attending a little conference. And I remember just feeling so disconnected and conflicted about my life choices to become a professor and study machine learning. And then I saw a little segment in the conference called computational creativity. And I was like, oh, creativity, interesting. And so I went to the back of the room and then I see Harold Cohen starting to splash these pictures on the projector, these beautiful pieces of art. And suddenly he starts arguing with himself on stage about whether or not his machine painter is creative. And I was just, wow. And in that moment, I've decided that I'm going to study this, figure out what it's about. But that was really the beginning of my journey, about 10 years before all this stuff went mainstream.
It's probably important for us to share the definition of creativity that most scientists rely on. Creativity is novelty plus value plus surprise, because before we can talk about creative machines, let's talk about what it is to be creative as a human.
Yeah, so that's one really funny thing about creativity, right? The moment somebody says something, you can just change the lens. Are we talking about a process or product? Are we talking about the kind of creativity that changes the world or the kind of creativity that society role should be engaging in? One definition that helps ground the conversation, so that creativity is exactly like you said, novelty plus value. And then sometimes we add surprise as well. And here we're referring to a creative object, right? So I can say that this painting is creative if it's novel enough. It's not just a copy of another painting. And it has value, at least aesthetic value in that context. So value is domain specific. And when we have that, opens the door to machine creativity, because then we're judging it by what it's outputting. So it's a good grounding.
Maya, one of the things with this show is we look at the science and neuroscience of learning, and I thought we'd lean into that a little bit because of the creativity. And I'm jumping ahead a bit here to the risks, I suppose, of using machines to replace human creativity and not working together with them. Because a lot of people are fast tracking the struggle of creation, whether that be art or music or writing, to use AI just to get there faster. And in there, we're losing something important.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting space because in a way, the makers of the systems have certain expectations and different users have different needs and expectations. So as Gen AI got pushed, it got pushed with the idea that we want to be rescued from the need to be creative. Here, I'll do this instead of you. Like, hey, Don, you don't need to worry about painting. There you go. Now you look how creative you're being, right? Which maybe is okay if it's really something you're just doing for work, something you're doing for someone else that you don't care about. But if you're the one trying to be creative, you're turning creativity into a spectator sport. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. And slowly the industry is trying to move towards giving us more collaborative tools. And human creatives are finding the most innovative ways to use tools not designed to work with them.
I thought we'd share beyond the book some of the things that you're seeing, because you mentioned stuff like the AI painter. You mentioned AI music creativity with EMI, for example, or EMI. I don't know how you pronounce that, but let's share a little bit about those and then how you see us working with them to create value as a collaborator or a cobot.
So it's interesting, both in academia and in industry. At first, people are excited about autonomous creativity or the agent. What can AI do by itself? For example, Amy is always presented, so that's David Cope's system, Experiments in Musical Intelligence, back from the 80s, presented as an autonomous system, whereas in reality, he did a lot of interactive work with it. Today, we get really excited about agents that do stuff all by themselves. But really, the beauty of AI when it comes to creative endeavors, where it's really meaningful as part of culture, is when it helps people to profoundly express themselves, right? So this is literally what I do. So I have so many stories, but I'll tell you just one here. We did a study quite a while ago, around 2020, with the University of Dundee on bereavement. So the idea was that people would write songs about loved ones they have lost recently. And so the idea of having a machine writing it instead of you, making it super easy, doesn't quite make sense here, because it's about the process of grieving. It's about that creative expression in order to release what's locked inside of you. And a lot of people said, I could never write lyrics. I don't know. I don't know how to do this. This is too intimidating. And so then they used our system, Alicia, which is especially the part of it that has become LyricStudio. And it would give them the confidence. It would write a little bit. It would give one line, give them some choices. They would pick a line or two, and suddenly they're like, what do I know what to do? I know what to do. And what would end up happening is that they would write almost the entire lyrics by themselves. And the role of the machine was just to give them a little bit of confidence and give them a little bit of a push. And this is where we need to go.
There's an artist called Olafur Arnalds. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an Icelandic pianist. Have you ever heard of him?
No, I've not.
So the reason I share that, I know you were a pianist. I know you lost your piano when you had to move as well. Sorry to hear that. So this is when Maya was a child. But Olafur Arnalds has this beautiful thing. There was this thing called the Moog piano bar, and it was created to turn your beautiful grand piano into a synthesizer, and nobody used them. They didn't see the use for it. But he got a friend of his to create an algorithm, and what he did was he created two what he called player pianos. You know the way in a haunted movie where the piano starts playing by itself. So he used these Moog piano bars, and when he shared this idea, it really sprung to me the real value of using AI with a human. So he said that he's a trained pianist. So for example, he would play an A minor and then would say, naturally, when you play that chord, you'd go on to an F or something like that. And he said what happened was the AI, when he played a note, the two pianos would play these sequences that no human would play because they're trained in a certain way. And he said what the value was that it would lead him in a different direction next, in a direction that he would not have chosen otherwise. And for me, that's the beautiful way that AI can bring you in a different direction. And I thought that's the real sense I got from your work with WaveAI and indeed your creative passions.
The way that you described it, honestly, is perfect. It's perfect. If you think about any creative space, a chapter you could write, a book title, a song, the next line of lyrics, it's this massive space of possibility. Imagine it as like stars in the sky. It's enormous. And most of us, even very successful creatives, tend to follow very specific paths within this sky of possibilities. And one of the most beautiful things that AI can do is exactly what you said. Help us turn a different direction. And then we start exploring there.
Maybe we'll share a little bit about the background. So before we get into limitations a bit more, and I love how you bring in philosophy and psychology and bring in Jung and the shadow collective consciousness. We'll get there in a moment, but give us a bit of the history here of expert systems, really importantly, Markov chains. I think that for me was a real aha moment when you wrote about that. And then neural networks as well. I thought if we explain the history, and you do this beautifully, you do this very simply to bring people on the journey, because then we can understand actually what's going on behind the curtain.
I hardly ever get to speak about that. Thank you. A lot of AI starts with imitation. So the goal of AI used to be to come up with an intelligence that's on par with human intelligence. Then we understood that we don't have to imitate human intelligence in order to create something intelligent. It can be differently intelligent from us, which is really important. But it's the same thing about the process. And that's been an interesting journey. First, we started with introspection. So, you have a painter, Cohen. He had his way of painting, and so he taught Aaron to paint using exactly his process. So it requires introspection. Human introspection is limited in general. Harold didn't make a job with that, but if humans had perfect introspection, you could ask doctors, how do you diagnose people? How do you choose how to cure them? And they would tell us exactly what they do, and we would code it into a computer, and we would have replaced doctors 50 years ago. But humans don't have perfect introspection. It's okay. That's how brains work. They work, and we don't know how they work. That's reality for the most part. We don't know how we do the things we do. Not enough to code it into a machine. And so gradually we gave our machines more and more freedom. Like we went from being these hyper-controlling parents, telling our AI exactly what to do, into giving them gradually more and more freedom. Until now, we finally have the resources and the power, the real electrical power, to be able to create actual machines' brains that learn by themselves from data that we give them. And because finally the machine brain can be big enough, it can do a really good job learning from it, which is why actually managing what the machine does and guaranteeing its behavior is very difficult. But at the same time, it can do these amazing emergent things that we don't even plan for it to be able to do.
Maybe we'll explain the Markov blankets or the Markov connections, because for me, that was a piece that when you described it simply, or you're even thinking about how they're chains that just are the next link in the chain, literally like a chain. And that's how AI actually builds. But then equally, it depends on what you've fed it as chains.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Thank you for, reharvesting of fabric. So let's take like Emily Dickinson poetry or Dr. Seuss or the tweets of your favorite or not favorite politician, right? Consider any body of writing that had a distinct style. A really simple exercise that I always do with students of mine who study AI is to show them how easy it is to do something that's generative, okay? It's incredibly simple. You build this teeny tiny little model. You literally look at how often each word in your data set is followed by another word. You look at all pairs that are consecutive, and you just count how often is the word creative followed by the word machines. If you're looking at my body of work, for example. And you do it for every single pair of words. And you essentially build this graph where each word, there's like a circle for each word. And then there's a line connecting each pair of words with the probability of going from one word to another. And that probability is just directly copied from your data. It literally is the probability that that word follows everyone in your data set. So now we have these lines that connect these circles. And what we're going to do is we're going to, for simplicity's sake, randomly drop into one of these circles. Just any one of them, right? And now we're going to follow these probabilities. So if one line has probability of 0.5, then there's a 50% chance that we follow that link. And you just start following those links with the probability listed on the lines. and you generate. So you went from having a data set to be able to generate stuff that is supposed to be in the style of this data set. It's not going to be perfect, but it's stunning how well something so simple works.
And Maya, what changed in the last few years that we had the breakthrough with the ability to do this? Was it the data sets were big enough, or was it the power of computing was big enough? What was the breakthrough?
So to some degree, we were able to do this for a long time, but what is now enabling us to do it this well, right? Like really, definitely there's a big gap between what we could do now, what we can do now and what we could do before. And a lot of the breakthroughs were gradual, but a really big one was when OpenAI managed to convince Microsoft to make an unprecedented investment in doing the largest machine brain ever. We're talking about billions of dollars here. And they did that. They actually wrote a paper that explains why bigger machine brains are going to be smarter, which is obvious in retrospect. But that's really what started moving things. GPT-3 showed incredible capability, and that's before ChatGPT, right? It already was starting to show us how far machine intelligence can go.
One of the things I mentioned earlier on was the Jungian elements. You're obviously a Jung scholar. You've read about Jung, and you talked about the collective unconscious and the shadow. And I often think about the show that's on Netflix called Black Mirror. And the whole idea is the Black Mirror is like with the phone, it's like a black mirror as a also like a shadow of society. So it's showing back to society how we behave, where we might not want to admit that. And sometimes we look in the mirror and go, oh, that's ugly. And in the same way, you say that this is what AI, I love how you position this. This is what AI really is. And it's one of the problems with AI is that if we think about all those Markov chains, we're the ones who have fed it the chains. So if we're getting back answers we don't like, we're the ones who's fed it in the first place.
We don't like looking ourselves in the mirror. So at first, if you look at some of the earlier models, even ChatGPT, but definitely the ones before that, you still have some of the less aligned models like Midjourney, but they're just so honest about humanity. I did some experiments on how Jewish people are portrayed in AI systems. And one of the most benign things is you ask for sukkot, which is a Hanukkah food, and you get bagels, which is again relatively benign. I don't think that that's a terrible form of anti-Semitism or anything, but it shows how the West doesn't really understand Jewish culture. How they know bagels, but they don't know the real Jewish foods that go with the holidays. And some of the stuff was much more serious. Like I just shared the light example here. When you give a picture of a woman and you add the word professor or CEO with Midjourney, you get facial hair on that woman, right? So it's like saying that there must be something really masculine about her if she's doing these things. And I think that there's something really beautiful, painful, but beautiful about this honesty. And the final thing I want to add, which is not in the book, is that we have seen this extreme alignment in LLMs today. Again, not all the models and the shadow still comes through, but there is this really extreme alignment. There's this effort that these companies are doing to eliminate this mirror experience. But what they're doing instead is they're just normalizing it to what's appropriate in the West. And actually in the process, in some cases, making things worse. So very interesting how much we struggle with our shadow and how that's reflected in this industry.
You talked about hallucinations at one stage, and again, you liken it to a human having maybe psychedelics. And I was reading recently about psilocybin, so the active ingredient of magic mushrooms. And what it does in the brain is actually it silences or it activates certain parts of the brain. Actually, it turns off certain parts of the brain, it turns on other parts of the brain. And you start to make connections because the brain is almost got Markov blankets as well. It's got these silos. And I was thinking then, because you say it's exactly what happens when the machine hallucinates because it starts to mix up its data. But in there, you can have these massive breakthroughs, but you also can have what we call the hallucination that happens with AI. I'd love if you'd share a little bit about that.
That's one of my favorite topics. After the Industrial Revolution, we like to believe that the world is concrete and real and objective, and that what we see is reality. But the truth is that the human experience is deeply steeped in imagination. And neuroscience is showing that the way that we engage with the world is through small-scale prediction. You don't really see the world or hear the world, you interpret it. And sometimes the interpretation is so off that we notice. Let's say after a breakup, you might see your ex when they're not there, right? You might mistake other people for being them, for pardon of a way, which is something that happened to me. But it's even when it's not that extreme to us, we are constantly projecting past experience onto the present. That's almost what trauma is. But even when it's not trauma, we're doing it. And it's not good or bad. It's the way it is. We are an imaginative being. And the reason that our machines right now are so successful and so smart is because they finally learn how to imagine in a way that's quite similar to us. And just like we get mad at each other or at our kids when their imagination makes us uncomfortable, when it goes too far, whatever that means, it's the same thing with our machines. No, you're wrong. Do what's right. And so we've made these LLMs much less creative in an effort to make them behave. So there's just so much more potential, like letting our machines breathe a little bit.
I was asking you about what's changed, and you mentioned OpenAI and the investment to build a bigger brain. But also, you hear, and I don't know how true this is, but that we're running out of data to feed these LLMs. Because if you think about it there, if you're feeding it Markov chains, you have to have enough chains of data. But I was thinking that how a lot of LLMs are actually using information on the internet to feed themselves, yet a lot of the information on the internet is already created by AI. So it's like self-cannibalization. It's eating itself. It's like the Ouroboros. It's feeding on itself. And it means that the content becomes more and more useless because it's actually not coming from that beautiful, unique human place, real research that you do, for example, as a researcher, that the origin isn't there. And there's a real danger in that.
Yeah, I really agree with you there. It's almost comical. Researchers have done really diverse research. We keep exploring new directions. And it's almost, I keep thinking of California, how people came here to dig gold. Researchers went around, poked around, and found these little pots of gold. And then OpenAI had a lot of money, and so they drilled really deep, found this one like enormous source of gold. Let's make chatbots. And then everybody else who has a lot of money to drill came, and they're drilling around like a square inch where OpenAI is drilling. The lack of imagination in industry is stunning. They have so much resources. They can afford the best minds in the world who are willing to work for them. And all they can do is make little iterations on each other. And it's on purpose, right? They're making a safe bet. This is not an accident. And so they realize more data, bigger brain makes it smarter. So they're like, well, my God, do we need to go to Mars to buy more data? Like, how do we create more data? But the reality is that if you constrain the machine less, if you let it imagine more, if you make it less of a copy machine and more of an imagination engine, there's so much more that you can do with this technology.
Just like in school, let the kids imagine. But bringing it back to education, I thought we'd use that collective consciousness. So you talk a lot about bias and AI, etc. We've spoken about that before on this show. But I really wanted to share your framework for using AI as a tool to enhance human creativity and, really importantly, your perspective on AI ethics.
Appreciate it. So let's imagine that you have a collaborator. You're trying to learn how to paint, and there's a person that's assigned to partner with you to help you out. Maybe they're head in the art program or something. And they could say, oh, okay, so you're struggling here. And they take the brush from you and they turn around and they fix the issue that you're having. Actually, they take a brand new canvas and they're like, here, I fixed a few more things. And here I did it. And they just keep doing that. And you try to engage, you try to say, oh, actually, I meant this. Trying to make it kind of darker. I was trying to experiment with that texture. And each time they just throw the canvas away and take a new canvas and turn away from you and get it all done and behave like a text-based model. And then you're like, oh, what is wrong with me? Why am I unsatisfied? Why does this, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I just forget about it. I don't need this art class. Or there could be another person that you have the same challenge and they're like, oh, okay. And they gently give a suggestion, or maybe they give you an example on another canvas, but they prioritize you. And when you don't need them, they're just barely there when you don't need anything from them. That's like a good educator, right? They want you to grow. The goal is your creativity, not to give you a creative product quickly, but to help your creative process grow. And the goal is that after interacting with a person like that, you will become permanently more creative. You'll become a better painter, even if that relationship concludes for whatever reason. And that's a kind of bar that we need to set for our technology. People who've used LyricStudio, my system that helps people write lyrics, have told me that they become permanently better lyricists. And I'm finally starting to think this idea start to take root a little bit in the industry at large.
Beautiful. It's also like being a good parent. Nudge them along, but don't do it for them. It's very difficult not to when you're under pressure, under time pressure as well. And finally, let's share your perspective on ethics in AI, because this is something that we don't hear enough of.
So perhaps one of my main points is around AI and the all-knowing oracle. We have this desire to have life be more predictable, to have somebody know what the answers are, be it a religious leader, God, like some kind of entity in this universe that knows what's going to happen, that knows the right way, right? It gives us comfort in a world that's really incredibly uncertain. And whether it's true or not is a separate issue, but there's definitely this kind of pull. And so one of the things that I believe made ChatGPT so successful is that it pretends to be that. It pretends to be this all-knowing oracle. And if you look at the marketing, if you look at how the industry speaks about LLM, they're feeding the science fiction narrative that this is our Wizard of Oz, this is our all-knowing oracle, and we should be able to trust it. If it's wrong, that's a hallucination, that's a mistake, that's like an exception. And so we get super mad when these things are wrong, when they lead to terrible suicide and like work slot, these things with different stakes. We get really mad, and perhaps we should. But an important piece of the puzzle is removing this idea that it should be an all-knowing oracle. The idea that something knows the truth about everything is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's not going to happen. We don't agree with each other what the truth is. There is no absolute truth. It's not how reality works. And so we need to stop trying to create it. And we need to educate our children that this is just a machine that somebody built. And you should take what it says with the same skepticism, with the same questioning as you would anything that a person has told. And that will remove a lot of problems. If you do this theory of mind shift.
Let's share where people can find you.
Our claim to fame is LyricStudio. It's lyricstudio.net and lyricstudio.com, and wave-ai.net is the website more broadly. But if you want to follow me specifically, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. That's my main social. And today we spoke about the book Creative Machines and Us, which is available on Amazon and elsewhere.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, author of Creative Machines, AI Art, and Us, Maya Ackerman. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.